Welcome to Presentation 8, the series where we're looking at the book of Daniel. Visions and deeper insights. As usual, let's just look back at the previous presentation. We're looking at chapter 9 here, Daniel's prayer and the vision that followed. Now our God, hear the prayers and petitions of your servant. For your sake, Lord, look with favour on your desolate sanctuary. Give ear, our God, and hear. Open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. We do not make requests of you because we are righteous, but because of your great mercy. Lord, listen. Lord, forgive. Lord, hear and act. For your sake, my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. So often in our prayer lives, we come with a shopping list to God. Daniel was a bit different. He'd moved to a different level. His concern was God's reputation. Because God's reputation is carried by his people. Your people bear your name. Name means reputation. Great message for us today in that. After the prayer, there is a series of visions. God's people would be restored to Judah, fulfilling Jeremiah's 70-year prophecy. But the people of God would never experience political freedom. They would always be ruled by external empires. And they would face considerable opposition and persecution from time to time. And that comes through the visions of Daniel's 70 times 7 insights. In all of this, the people of God were being prepared for the coming of God's kingdom, the kingdom that outlives human empires and is still growing today. Spiritual freedom, a radically new way of thinking, achieved for us through the finished work of Jesus. Jesus came to bring the kingdom. Repent and believe the good news. We start by realizing we've got things wrong, we've messed up, we want something better. But his kingdom is a spiritual kingdom, never ever a political or physical kingdom. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. A long period of time required to achieve and complete 6 things, which were achieved and completed finally in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. 3 things deal with our attitude of rebellion and our wrong behavior and the consequences for it. But 3 things release God's power so that we, God's people, can live the way of Jesus. And all the visions and prophecies of the past are shown to be true. Jesus achieved this all. He completed that process. There was preparation for all the centuries. Jesus came. He broke the power of human rebellion. He created the bridge between the rebellious humanity and a holy God. He released the Holy Spirit to empower for living. And he fulfilled and he confirmed all that vision and prophecy had pictured. The exile in Babylon would be a short period. First step in a process. Then there'd be a long period, and there would be many ups and downs on the way. Then the Anointed One would come, Jesus, to be rejected and killed by the spiritual leadership of his day. Then there's been another short period as the new work of God is established. The kingdom of God grows, develops, and then the nation state of Israel was finally abolished once and for all when the Romans flattened it in AD 70. What Daniel was being taught and shown was that the restoration after the exile, this was only a short part of a longer process, because God's people had so much to learn before they were ready for Jesus. But the overall goal for all these visions, so that Daniel could write them down because he was equipped to do so, and that would equip and prepare God's people for what lay ahead, and the evidence shows that it did help them. And there was an air of expectation when Jesus came, as people were expecting the arrival of God's Messiah. Now let's move on into this chapter. Chapters 10 to 12. Looking at it overall, we've got to watch, and I put up yet a warning, yet again. Terrible danger. People just reading more than is actually there. Some people have come to it assuming the meaning before they start. And if you do that with any book, you'll find the meaning is there. Some have come ripping the text out of context, remembering it's part of a sequence. The book makes a cohesive whole. It's a sequence of God's insights. So important to grasp that. And then people try to bend at the text to fit into events that are happening today and things that are going to happen in the future. It's never designed for that. We have to ask some simple questions. Where does this vision, in this series of chapters, where does it fit into the sequence of visions that Daniel has had? And why did God reveal these things to Daniel? It would make no sense to Daniel whatsoever to reveal things for the present age. And then Daniel would write it down, and it was left for people to read in the centuries that followed. How would the original readers in the next few centuries have got it? What would they have taken from it? So we've got to reject the dogmatism that so often has come and fitted its way around this book, where people have woven all sorts of homespun ideas and then tried to bend the book of Daniel to make it fit. Oh, it's such a danger. The whole book has a theme. God is speaking and preparing his people. They were in captivity, in exile in Babylon. Their land had been flattened and destroyed. They were about to get permission to go back. But it was not going to be easy. They had no idea what they would be facing. And the recognition that God is in control and will win the victory for his people. It's our choice whether we fit in with God's plans or not. We're free to take part or not. But God is in overall control. We can trust him. Starting with chapter 10, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel. It's called Belteshazzar. It's his Babylonian name. His message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. So it's dated fairly precisely, and Daniel would be in very old age at this stage of his life. At that time I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. Been a shock to his system, this vision, and we see it, not surprising. The 24th day of the 1st month I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris. I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. An apocalyptic vision. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up, trembling. An amazing vision. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Time yet to come, something not immediate, but doesn't imply far distant. While he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face towards the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe. Again the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. Do not be afraid. You are highly esteemed, he said. Peace. Be strong now, be strong. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Speak, my lord, since you have given me strength. So he said, Do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. And in the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him. Now when we read that, our heads spin. Questions fly all over the place. Who is the person in the vision right at the start? Is it one person or two? Because it seems a second person is speaking to Daniel. The person in the vision, all the signs point to him being God himself. And probably the speaker is an angelic being. Who are the princes of Persia and Greece that are mentioned? And who is Michael? That seems to be the pattern. It seems that there are spiritual beings that act on behalf of people groups. It's come down into our modern cultures as patron saints, but that's rather misleading. So there's a spiritual being that acts behind the people group of Persia and the people group of Greece, and Michael, the people group that is Israel. What's this book of truth that's mentioned? Now, in the original, it actually says that, in writing of truth. Truth is an interesting idea in the 21st century. It's largely gone. We need to remember that there is such a thing as objective truth. As anyone from my scientific background would know, otherwise science collapses. Our cultures have rejected that very foolishly and tragically. But truth implies, in the context here, that God has a plan for humanity. He's working out a plan for humanity. The extent to which we opt in is our decision. But the plan is there. It seems that there are cosmic spiritual battles that relate to the battles of God's people. Very deep idea. and some excellent books have come on the market in recent decades. Now, it's hinted at in the Bible. In Deuteronomy, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples, according to the number of the sons of God. Now this translation depends on the Dead Sea Scrolls and more modern insights. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob has his allotted inheritance. Sons of God is a phrase that always refers to angels. Angels, people groups, some sort of relationship. Isaiah picks up the same thing and implies that in that day the Lord will punish the powers in the heavens above and the kings on the earth below. They'll be herded together like prisoners bound in a dungeon. They'll be shut up in prison and be punished after many days. Got to watch the word punished as always. The word here means essentially visited. There's justice that comes at the end of the day. But the idea of the powers in the heavens above and the kings on the earth below, there's some sort of relationship between people groups and their leadership and spiritual powers, angels. But it raises all sorts of questions. In verse 14 it says, "Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." Now everything here refers to the people of Judah, your people, Daniel's people. And they were about to return and re-establish their nation. This is nothing to do with end times. The context and the language would not allow it. So it describes events that they will face in the time period up to the destruction of the nation in AD 70, when the kingdom of God was established, and we'll see how that fits together in the text later on. They were starting to return, but they were still under the Persian overlord. And Daniel is being shown that the battles in the physical realm, they're under the thumb of another empire, and then they'll be under the empire that's Greece, and then under the empire that was Rome. It runs in parallel with spiritual battles. Now we can't see these, but Daniel was given an insight. You see, when we humans rebel against God, we can open the doors to powerful spiritual forces, and that can drive forward increasing evil and brutality. Now you can see that vividly when any people group rebels against God and decides they're going to do something terrible, and you can see suddenly that whole people group goes into an era of evil and brutality that's completely inexplicable. We've seen it with Nazism. We've seen it with communism. Anti-God regime, both of them. And the sheer number of people that were brutalized and murdered because of it. Stalin in Russia probably was responsible for more deaths in the human race than anyone before or since. We can see the same happening in Russia today, Myanmar today. It's going on. But it's our choices. We can't just blame evil forces. There is a cosmic war lying behind human conflict. When we get together as nation states, we can do incredible evil. But we let loose spiritual powers that are there. It's our choice. But Daniel is being reminded that despite all that, God's still in control. He will see his people through. And we need to hang on to that today when we watch our televisions and see the brutality going on throughout the world. So chapter 10 pulls back the veil slightly. When human groups rebel against God, we can open the door to cosmic evil powers, and it can generate horrendous evils. But God is still going to see us through. Let's hang on to that. into chapter 11. It's very different from other biblical prophecies. As you'll see, there's a high level of precision in it. And there's considerable disagreement. I'm going to present one, and it's a very common one, and it's one that's been held widely down through the centuries, approach to this. That's how we view the section. Think about why Daniel was given the vision. For whose benefit? He was a man in great old age, but he was capable of writing it down coherently, highly educated. That's the goal of the book. And it was for his people that were going back to settle in the land, facing enormous opposition. And it speaks of the few centuries before the nation was finally wiped out, as a people group and a political entity. God's in control. He will see his people through, no matter what happens round about us. How important that is. Context is always important. He's an old man. He has served faithfully in 2 courts, foreign courts. He's remained faithful to God throughout, showing it is possible, the theme of the early chapters of the book. He's witnessed various exiles because it came in stages. He's witnessed the hardships that came to the people of God, and he understood why the exiles had happened. But he knew that restoration would happen, and it was about to start. He couldn't see all the details. Were his people ready? How would they cope with the enormous obstacles that lay ahead? Would he have any part in this? No evidence he ever did. He was probably too old to return. But he left behind a valuable book that would equip his people to cope. And to cope in very difficult circumstances. And that leads on to how we understand chapter 11. The context, the background, the purpose. Now then I tell you the truth, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will arise, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has arisen, his empire will be broken up and parcelled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because the empire will be uprooted and given to others. Now we can't identify these with any certainty. Probably that's Xerxes the First, in that he stirred up animosity with Greece, which was a kind of an emerging empire at that time. That would be Alexander the great Greek leader. We've seen before just what he achieved. But after his death at a very young age, 4 of his generals divided up his great empire into 4 parts. The king of the south, that's part of the empire, will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he, and he will rule his own kingdom with great power. After some years they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days she will be betrayed, together with the royal escort and her father, and the one who supported her. King of the south, Ptolemy II, ruled the southern part of the empire that was formerly Alexander's. And it was Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II, was used as to try and bridge between the king of the south and the king of the north, 2 parts of the Greek empire. As so often happened, a marriage, an arranged marriage, and the king of the north was Antiochus II. It all fits so precisely. But Antiochus II, Berenice, the daughter of the southern kingdom's ruler, and their son were all assassinated. So that power line disappeared. Someone from within her family will arise to take her place. It's Berenice. He will attack the forces of the king of the north, stirred up more trouble between two parts of the empire, and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and be victorious. He will also seize their gods, their metal images, and their valuable articles of silver and gold, carry them off to Egypt. That shows it's the kingdom, the southern part of this sawn up Greek empire, that ruled Egypt and neighbouring nations. For some years he will leave the king of the north alone. That's the Seleucid Empire. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, another war, but will retreat to his own country. His sons will prepare for war and assemble a great army, which will sweep on like an irresistible flood and carry the battle as far as his fortress. Endless wars between the Seleucid Empire in the north and the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. We can identify these people very easily. Ptolemy III took over, and that was from within the same family. Seleucus II of the northern kingdom. There was a bit of peace between the two. They'd had enough war for a moment, but it didn't last. His two sons prepared for war and were very successful. Battles between these two kingdoms. But why was Daniel being shown this? Why all the detail? Look at the map and it all makes complete sense. Now there is the empire of Alexander the Great, chopped into four on his premature death, four of his generals taking the parts. You can see the huge Seleucid Empire stretching right across the edge of India. The Ptolemaic Empire centered on Egypt. But look at where the people of God were, the people of Judah. They'd gone back from exile, they'd settled in their land, they'd rebuilt their temple, they'd re-established their agriculture, and they were caught in the crossfire between two warring empires. That's why this is so important and why all the detail is given, to prepare the people to cope. They were going to be caught in the crossfire of battles. The two rulers were competing for power over a period of time. But the message of the vision is God's people will survive because God will protect them himself. That's why this is all given to us. Then it goes on. The king of the south, that's the Ptolemaic Empire based on Egypt, will march out in a rage and fight against the king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, who will raise a large army, but will be defeated. When the army is carried off, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will slaughter many thousands. Yet he will not remain triumphant, for the king of the north will muster another army, larger than the first, and after several years he advanced with a huge army, fully equipped. It goes on. In those times many will rise against the king of the south. Those who are violent among your own people will rebel in fulfillment of the vision. People of God got involved in this, but without success. Then the king of the north will come and build up siege ramps and will capture a fortified city. Then the forces of the south will be powerless to resist. Even their best troops will not have the strength to stand. The invader will do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him. He will establish himself in the beautiful land. That's the land of Judah, the fertile area, and will have the power to destroy it. So there'll be a king from the north does this. He will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom, make an alliance with the king of the south. Give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom, but his plans will not succeed or help him. Then he will turn his attention to the coastlands and will take many of them, but a commander will put an end to his insolence and will turn his insolence back on him. After this he will turn back towards the fortresses of his own country, but will stumble and fall, to be seen no more. Now this describes the battles between Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire and Ptolemy IV of the Ptolemaic Empire in the south, and the toings and froings that go on between them, with the people of God caught in the crossfire and foolishly sometimes siding with one or the other. His successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendour, running out of money with all these wars. In a few years, however, he will be destroyed, yet not in anger and battle. He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who's not been given the honour of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully. With only a few people, he will rise to power. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither his fathers nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers. He will plot the overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. God's in control. And the picture there fits exactly what Antiochus IV did. He came to the rulership by devious means, became the ruler of the Seleucid Empire, threw his weight around all over the place, both north and south, and turned his attention to destroy the people of God. With a large army he stirred up his strength and courage against the king of the south, Ptolemaic Empire. King of the south will wage war with a large and very powerful army, but not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. Those who eat from the king's provisions will try to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. Oh, the people who suffer because of this. The two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, north and south, will sit at the same table and lie to each other. Negotiations, but doesn't work, because an end will still come at the appointed time. God's in control. The king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the Holy Covenant, God's people. He will take action against it and then return to his own country. At the appointed time he'll invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart, turn back, and vent his fury against the Holy Covenant, God's people. He will return and show favour to those who forsake the Holy Covenant, those who give in. In history, in that year, Seleucus IV died, in the northern kingdom, Seleucid Empire, and his brother Antiochus IV eventually took over after quite a lot of intrigue. Now there were problems amongst God's people. How often this has happened down through history. Divisions. And we're reaping the inheritance of it today, to our shame. People were jockeying for power amongst God's people. The high priest held great power in the land. There was no kingship then. People were jockeying for that position. Oh, how we see this, and even in many Christian groups today, local churches, local Christian areas, we still see examples of people jockeying for power and influence, to our shame. But what happened in the land of Israel then amongst God's people was that one group favoured the southern kingdom, the Ptolemaic Empire based in Egypt, and the other favoured the Seleucid Empire based in Syria. So they were aligning up and competing for the top positions in their land. Antiochus IV came to power. He made sure that the pro-Syrian group, the group that supported his empire, gained the high priesthood and the power amongst God's people. And we've seen that happen down through history. He won the battle. He went back, and in Jerusalem he built a fortress overlooking the temple, showing that his empire was bigger than the temple, making a political point. How often we use buildings to declare supremacy. He then intervened. He stopped the daily sacrifices in the temple, and he set up an altar to his God. But the divisions amongst God's people continued. And the people who opposed Antiochus came back. He massacred tens of thousands of them and enslaved others. It was a terrible time. And God's people did not act wisely in many cases, although there were many who did act and listen to what God was saying. There was a remnant amongst God's people who did remain faithful throughout, and eventually the land was set free from the control of the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus IV. But he didn't last forever. He died, and a greater peace then followed. This was given to Daniel in such precision so that he could write it down, so that the people that were coming in the next few centuries would be prepared for what was happening. And remember, hang on, remain faithful, God will see you through. That's the great message that underpins it. Going on to the text, his armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress. That's the building he put up on the edge of it. Abolish the daily sacrifice. They will set up the abomination that caused desolation. That's a wrong worship centre set up, worshipping the Syrian form of Zeus. With flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant. He bribed them. But the people who know their God will firmly resist him, and they did. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. They suffered. When they fall they will receive a little help. Many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble so that they may be refined, purified and made spotless until the time of the end. That's the coming of Jesus. For it will still come at the appointed time. The people were being prepared for the arrival of God's kingdom. The king will do as he pleases. Antiochus was completely beyond control. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. Dictatorial leaders above contradiction, and there's a few of them in the world still today. And we'll see unheard of things against the people of God, the God of gods. He'll be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. God's got a plan. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them he will honour a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honour with gold and silver, precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will still honour those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and distribute the land at a price. He bought favours by bribery, and he used violence. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle. Ptolemaic Empire comes in again. The king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many of the countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land, God's people. Many countries will fall like Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and the silver and all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him. From the Iran area, in fact, there were arisings. And he will set out in a great race to destroy and annihilate them. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. About that time he died. Those who are wise will instruct many. This is the central bit that gives us the clue to it all. We have here a picture which is shown to be the picture with remarkable accuracy of what happened in the centuries. This is built largely around the 2nd century BC. Daniel was shown what was going to happen, but it's also a picture of a typical leader who becomes a dictator, sets himself above contradiction, and then turns attention to bring down God's people because they oppose this. But the bit at the end puts it all into context. He will come to his end and no one will help him. He died almost in ignominy, somewhere in the Syrian area. But the key thing is, God's people. The message was given to Daniel for his people the next few centuries. And the principles apply to us today. How do we react when we're faced with this kind of behavior? And we see it in many places in the world, and indeed there are elements of it growing in the West. Spiritual wisdom. Those who are wise. We're not talking about intellectual wisdom. We're talking about spiritual wisdom. We have here the picture of an archetypal dictatorial ruler. And you can see the same pattern of behavior has happened again and again down through the centuries and is happening today. They become a law unto themselves, beyond contradiction. Everyone who disagrees with them is eliminated. That's pretty close to declaring yourself divine. At the outset, it appears to work. But it depends on armaments and violence. Antiochus IV depended on fortresses, weapons, armies, and it buys loyalty by distributing rewards to those who will come along with it. People come against it, but these people are not united. And God's people are caught in the crossfire. And when we try to stand against things that are anti-God, we suffer. Those who don't worship God often get away with it because they're not a threat to such a dictator. It all seems to work for a while, but it doesn't work in the long run. It never does. This was to prepare God's people. The future of the world, and the future of the world here described as the future up to the coming of God's kingdom with Jesus. The principles apply in all time, including today. Competition between warring empires and individuals. History shows how true it is. Sometimes we just suffer in the crossfire. But when we stand up for truth and righteousness, we suffer more directly. It's specifically for God's people, this message. And it written originally for the people who were going into the land in the coming few centuries. It's tough to cope with this. We're not coping well in the West with the beginnings of this that are growing and the anti-God movements that are developing. Being wise, and it's not human wisdom. That's where we make the mistake today. It's spiritual wisdom. And that's what so often happens. And we can see it happening in Christian groups today over some of the great social issues of our modern era. We've got to learn, but it's developing spiritually. Understanding the biblical picture holistically. Seeing the teaching of Jesus in its width. Praying together, praying individually, seeking God's wisdom. And remembering that God is still in control and that the evil people will not go on forever. If you're like, we're on the winning side even when we lose our lives. But that's a tough message to live up to when we're faced with the real issues and see our families suffering. We ask the question, to enable God's people in the coming few centuries to cope better, fits into the central aim of the book. It was a message for Daniel, yes, but it was a message he wrote down for those who were following immediately. But it's a message for us today. Similar things will happen to us today and are happening in the world. There are wonderful followers of Jesus who are going through the most horrendous persecution and are living radiantly for Jesus even when their lives are on the line. That's what's happening in the West. And we are divided tragically over the great social issues of the day, which are being enforced upon us. That's the answer, not our human cleverness. Hang on, God's in control. He will see us through. What a great message from this wonderful and remarkable vision. A message that we need to take on board in our Christian communities today. Now in the final presentation we're going to look at chapter 12. We got to 11 here, which brings it together, and then we're going to reflect on the book overall to see what God is saying to us today.